At the instant of takeoff, the vertical ground reaction force is behind the center of mass of the athlete. The angular momentum produced tends to rotate the athlete clockwise. During flight in the long jump, the athlete possesses some angular momentum and he rotates in the air. The large amount of forward angular momentum about the transverse axis is consistently a source of difficulty. Unless the long jumper takes appropriate steps to control it during the flight, it will lead to a landing with the feet beneath the body, instead of well extended in front of it, and thus to a loss in the distance of the jump. Let's see now how the long jumper can control the angular momentum in flight. The most elementary technique used during the flight phase of a long jump is one in which the athlete draws the knees up in front of the body and sails through the air in a tucked, sitting position. This is called the sail technique. However, unless the athlete has left the board with very little forward angular momentum, the low moment of inertia about the transverse axis virtually guarantees a poor landing position. The angular momentum during flight is considered stable and cannot be changed. To keep his balance in the air, the athlete can increase the moment of inertia, thus decreasing the angular velocity. Alternatively, with the proper movements of arms and legs, he can transfer the angular momentum of the body to his segments. That will allow him to have a better landing. Skilled athletes have several ways in which they may overcome the fundamental problem with the sail technique. Some raise their arms and extend their legs, thus maximizing the body's moment of inertia about the transverse axis, minimizing its forward angular velocity about that axis, and increasing the probability of obtaining a good landing. This is known as the hang technique, because the athlete appears to hang suspended while moving forward through the air. The athlete maintains the hang position for as long as possible during the flight, so as to minimize the amount of forward rotation. The hitch kick technique involves using the motions of the arms and legs to evoke a contrary reaction of the trunk, thereby maintaining the athlete's upright posture in the air. The athlete rotates their arms and legs forward, in a movement that is similar to running. This running in the air, or hitch kick technique, involves using the angular motions of the arms and legs to evoke a contrary reaction of the trunk, and thereby control the athlete's posture in the air. Because the athlete is in free flight, the athlete's total angular momentum must be conserved. The forward angular momentum generated by circling the arms and legs forward is therefore countered by an equal backwards angular momentum in the trunk. The athlete is thus able to counter the forward rotation of the body that was developed in the takeoff. No discussion of the flight techniques used by long jumpers would be complete without some reference to the most spectacular of them all, the somersault technique. In this technique, the athlete takes off with a relatively large amount of forward angular momentum, tucks tightly as soon as he leaves the ground, and performs a forward somersault before opening out for landing. Use of the somersault technique implies that the athlete seeks to exploit the forward angular momentum rather than fight against it. Regrettably, this technique was rendered obsolete by a rule change, just when the distances being reached were becoming competitive with those attained using more traditional techniques. Long jumpers choose their flight technique according to the amount of angular momentum they generate during the takeoff, and the time they have available before landing. Many coaches recommend the hang technique for athletes who usually generate a lower angular momentum during the takeoff, while the hitch kick is recommended for athletes who usually generate a higher angular momentum during the takeoff.